How much do we really owe the animal kingdom? Well, in this explainer, we're going to unpack the incredibly complex and frankly fascinating philosophical frameworks around animal rights and human obligations. We'll be looking at some deep, enduring questions about how we interact with the animal world and the vastly different ways thinkers have approached this throughout history. To really set the stage here, we have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the issue. Globally, 70 billion farm animals are bred for consumption every single year. 70 billion. It's a number so huge it's almost impossible to actually comprehend, but it is the absolute foundation of why this ethical debate is so incredibly urgent right now. And when we look at the landscape here in the US, it gets even starker. An overwhelming 99% of those animals live on factory farms. So you see, our discussion today isn't just about the abstract ethics of eating meat. It's about the massive, highly industrialized systems we've literally built to sustain it. Today, we're exploring this objectively. We'll cover the scale of animal use, suffering, and inherent value, the medical research debate, the case for vegetarianism, and finally, a biblical view on animals. Section 1. The scale of animal use. Now, notice the profound tension going on here. On one hand, you have 94% of Americans who believe farm animals absolutely shouldn't suffer. But on the other hand, the footprint of our agricultural system tells a completely different story. We're talking about 40% of U.S. agricultural emissions coming straight from factory farms, 260 million acres of forest literally leveled for animal feed, and dairy cows, they're producing 3.7 billion gallons of excrement every single day. There is a massive clash here between our societal ideals and our ecological reality. Which brings us to Section 2, Suffering and Inherent Value. Let's kick this off with Peter Singer. He actually coined the term speciesism back in 1975. Basically, it's a prejudice or bias toward your own species and against members of other species. He argued that just because we humans happen to be in control, with our higher cognitive functions, that doesn't automatically give us a free pass for moral privilege at the expense of other creatures. Singer famously argued that the capacity for suffering and enjoyment is a prerequisite for having interests. I mean, think about it. If you accidentally step on a dog's tail, it yelps, right? He was directly pushing back against that old 17th century idea from Descartes that animals are basically just unfeeling biological machines. Singer points out that our physiological similarities prove animals experience very real, genuine suffering. And since they feel pain, well, they obviously have a vested interest in avoiding it. Now, this is where it gets super interesting because you can really see a distinct difference between two of the movement's most prominent thinkers. Singer is very focused on the utilitarian capacity for pain. Basically, if it hurts, it matters. But then you have philosopher Tom Regan. He takes a different route, arguing that because animals possess basic awareness, they have an inherent value, exactly equal to human infants or developmentally disabled adults. Regan says we can't just view them as receptacles for pleasure or pain, but rather as experiencing subjects of their own lives. Moving on to Section 3, the medical research debate. So how does quality of life factor into all of this? Well, unlike Singer and Regan, who are strictly opposed to animal testing, philosopher R.G. Frey bypasses the whole concept of rights altogether. He argues that yes, animal lives absolutely have value, but a normal adult human life has a much higher quality and richness to it, which, in his view, justifies biomedical research on animals. He shifts the entire metric away from do they suffer to what is the scope of their enrichment. But Frey totally embraces a pretty harsh logical conclusion to keep his argument consistent. He actually acknowledges that his quality of life metric implies that experimentation on certain human subjects with lower capacities would technically also be appropriate. It's a very difficult logical end for sure, but he accepts it to maintain his core premise. It's the richness of a life, not simply the species tag, that dictates moral standing. Let's pivot a bit to Section 4, the case for vegetarianism. We're going to look at what we eat through a theological lens now. Drawing heavily from medieval philosophy, Andrew Tardif visualizes reality as this ladder of value, arguing that we need to appropriately respect each organism's place within the created order. At the very base, you have inanimate nature, and then you move up through plants, sentient animals, humans, and ultimately, God at the top. And honestly, we intuitively recognize this hierarchy all the time in our daily lives. I mean, no one demands a good reason from you if you swat a mosquito that's buzzing in your ear. But society is rightfully horrified by the casual abuse of a dog. We just inherently feel that some lives demand far more moral justification to end than others. This perfectly sets up what's called the principle of double effect. It's an ethical principle stating that it just isn't reasonable to allow a grave evil for a relatively insignificant good, and that the means used to achieve good shouldn't be evil themselves. So when you combine this with that hierarchy of being we just looked at, Tardif argues that if we can achieve perfect health by just eating plants, which sit much lower on the hierarchy, then deliberately killing ontologically superior animals just for food is basically unnecessary violence. Naturally, Tardif actively counters the most common objections here. He argues that the fleeting momentary pleasure of a good meal just doesn't warrant killing, especially not today when we have incredibly convincing modern substitutes like the Impossible Whopper readily available. And what about fears of totally upending the economy? Well, he points out that a gradual shift toward a cruelty-free diet isn't going to crash the system overnight, because markets naturally adjust over time as consumer demands evolve. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, a biblical view on animals. As Psalm 50 famously puts it, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The absolute foundational concept here is divine ownership. God owns everything, and what that means practically is that treating animals with cruelty or disrespect is fundamentally an indirect sign of disrespect toward their creator. They aren't just commodities for us to use, they are entrusted creations. And far from just ignoring animal welfare, these ancient texts reveal a deeply built-in cultural mandate requiring humanity to treat animals humanely. You see it in Exodus, ensuring working animals actually get Sabbath rest. You see it in Deuteronomy, saying you shouldn't muzzle an ox while it works, allowing it to eat. And Proverbs associates animal care directly with being a righteous person. The directives are remarkably clear about fulfilling this moral duty of compassion. So, whether you find yourself leaning towards Singer's utilitarianism, Tardif's hierarchy, or a biblical mandate, the practical synthesis of all of these lenses really points to some clear, actionable steps. It means opting for free-range animal products over factory-farmed ones. It means intentionally avoiding cosmetics that are painfully tested on restrained rabbits. It's about rejecting circuses that rely on harsh mistreatment for unnatural stunts and really questioning the use of traps that leave animals suffering for days on end. Having examined the truly massive scale of animal use and the profound philosophical lenses we use to understand it, the ultimate question isn't just about what these historical thinkers believed. It's about how their insights might impact your very next decision. Whether you're at the grocery store or the pharmacy, which of these frameworks resonates most with you? And more importantly, how will it shape the choices you make every single day?